What do you think is most misunderstood analytic metrics that protocols tend to rely on too often?
Active addresses, transaction counts. That's like a vanity metric. But I feel like it's a Pareto optimal game here. So 80% are still playing the vanity metrics, but then 20% are leaning more into data to guide their business decisions.
What is usually the data types that many teams misunderstand as being actually actionable, insightful, whereas they are more or less the barest minimum?
Recently was Eternal scandal. On paper, Eternal had a high number of total value logged, but underneath it was based on a looping strategy.
Well, we can have data here and we can have a dashboard. But what's that one step that makes the difference between just having the dashboard and having the data and then actually using the data?
From a risk perspective, one thing you'd ask yourself is how
Yeah, hello everyone. It's another pleasure to be in the first episode of Web3 Growth Marketing for the year 2026. Interestingly, we are actually live with one of my very good friends within Web3 data, primarily speaking. And this episode, we are looking to actually discuss pretty much everything around data. But our focus is on Dune Analytics, importance of dashboards, and pretty much some of the nuances and myths that we think many Web3 teams get wrong with data, generally speaking. As always, my name is Optimus Prime, and I have with me some very good friends who I'm going to give the floor to introduce himself. Starting with Joel. Joel, please introduce yourself, and then Chris can go on to introduce himself here.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Joel, and I'm a DeFi analyst. I currently work with Momo Protocol as a data contributor and as a super delegate for the governance team. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Optimus.
Always a pleasure, my guy. What about the legend? He's Chris has been on the podcast before, but I mean, it doesn't hurt to introduce yourself again.
Hi guys, my name is Christian and I'm a blockchain data consultant. Get to like work with protocols, on smart accounts and crypto payments. And it's really been a pleasure working in this space.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. It's such a pleasure to meet everyone. One of the key nuances that I think we're going to start our conversation with is centered around something that I and Chris has talked about before, which is the abundance or the plethora of data that's available within the industry or within the space, I would like to call it. Multiple Dune dashboards and lots of indexes that have gone forth from Genesis blocks or to current block. One of the things that I think I've found, which I think we're going to start our conversation off with, is centered around the fact that when we have so much data in this space, does it necessarily mean that because we have this plethora of data and all of our actions on chains are always recorded in time, wouldn't it mean that we're going to translate to an industry where better decision making is being made? If anything, there's going to be less noise, more proper nuances, and more strategic decisions are being made because data is always available. However, when you look at the space, from example, from everyone's experience, one of the things that we find is that that's not always the case. But as data analysts, working with multiple protocols, working on multiple campaigns, working on multiple dashboards, solving multiple data problems, what do you think is usually the solution to move from this point where, yes, we have so much data available? How do we translate that data to proper decision making as opposed to just having them on the dashboard? Yeah, you can go first, Joe.
Okay. When it comes to mitigating risks within the lending protocols, within the several markets, assets, and even when it comes to user behavior. So I think that was one thing I didn't know prior to getting into the space, because I was looking at data from the perspective of growth marketing, having a marketing background. But since my transition and study of the lending space and how risk is being mitigated, how risk is being kind of, planned for in a way, and you could see that a lot of those plans, a lot of those calculations, a lot of those precautions in that sense are based on factual data, like data that you can actually utilize. So I think that's been an eye opener in the past few weeks that I've been studying about it, because when you see protocols often rely on base metrics, but when it comes to risk, you can't just you can't rely on any base metric. You really have to go into it based on your speed, user behavior, or all these risk parameters. You have to go in deep and actually come out with fact data to back up whatever decision you want to make. So when it comes to the risk space, data has been very, very, very. It has been an important factor when it comes to recommending risk parameters for these protocols, and I think that's been an eye opener.
I think that's interesting. There's full of questions to that. I'll love to hear Chris' opinion on this question here.
Okay, starting off from what Joe said, for a lot of protocols who've understood important data, they are investing a whole lot to getting their data game right. Unfortunately, not every protocol are rational. In behavioral economics, we learn about that humans are rational beings. So as a result, most protocols still base their decisions on marketing hypes, active addresses, transaction counts. If they want to see transaction, our chain has processed 1 billion transactions. But that's like a vanity metric. So for the most part, most protocols are still playing the vanity metrics game, but very few are learning to play the long term game. And even there's something that I've actually learned from my experience working with clients is that what you analyze for clients who need data is actually a bit different from what you do when you are building data reward. I mean, hardly a protocol contracts you to work for them, and then they're asking you for active addresses. Sometimes you get to hear about metrics you've never heard before. So it's to tell you the level of intelligence that is being put into the world. So for the very few who've understood, I feel like it's a Pareto optimal game here. So 80% are still playing the vanity metrics, but then 20% who really, especially those that have found product market fit, are leaning more into data to guide their business decisions. I think that gap is going to close with time.
That's quite interesting. It does bring me to a point where I need to now start asking questions like, what in itself do you think is the most understood analytics metric that most misunderstood analytic metrics that protocols tend to rely on too often? I know number one for me is going to be total active users. That's going to be one of the most interesting on-chain vanity metrics. But Joe is saying when you look at risk parameters, for example, on-chain data gives a lot of insight into decision making. Chris is saying there's a Pareto principle where 80% still chase vanity metrics and 20% really understand the kind of data that they want. When you look at all of these spectrums, if you put them in a spectrum, for example, what is usually the data types that many teams misunderstand as being actually actionable, insightful, whereas they are more or less the barest minimum? That's what Joe actually.
Well, I think we could start off with total value logged. Then we could graduate to cumulative sums, because it's usually when it comes to metrics for all-time high. I think recently I saw the one by Aave, where Aave is almost hitting 1 trillion in I think total supplied. You'd see that it's a cumulative sum of all the supply that's happened on the platform, not necessarily the current supply across chain, right? So, and it's kind of interesting. From the outside, it looks like a very, obviously it's a big achievement, no doubt. But then there's more to data, on-chain data, than all these data types, really. And you'd see that usually most of these in-depth data types, you don't see them surface on social media. You'd see them within forums or internal meetings, basically. When it comes to the social media, crypto Twitter, that's where you'd see all these data types that I've just mentioned come to limelight or be frequently used to kind of convince people of how well the protocol is doing. But like I said, there's so much to on-chain data than these metrics, and I think those are the metrics that can be very misleading and very confusing. Because when it comes to total value log, for instance, you could see that okay, yeah, this particular protocol has this total amount of assets logged, right? But from a risk perspective, one thing you'd ask yourself is how easy can these assets be distributed or transferred in the case of an attack? Because recently was the eternal scandal. You could see it had very huge. So on paper, Eternal had a high number of total value logged, but underneath it was based on a looping strategy that brought about that high number. So that is a very good example of when it comes to all these metrics. On a surface level, on paper, they're very good, but you have to ask yourself more questions. Okay, for the total value that you're seeing, what percentage of it is actually liquid? Is this the measurable liquidity when push comes to shove? For me, cumulative sums and TVL obviously are they are the very tricky data types that you'd have to be very very you have to take like a granular look at it to be able to understand what is actually going on within.
I think that's interesting. Chris, when it comes to TVL, I agree with Joel that it is very misleading because you can look into total value locked by chain, total value locked in different categories and really break it down and you can see that maybe majority of the value being locked is just coming from one chain as when they are spread across 6 different chains. And then there's a looping strategy that can also kind of like inflate or bloat up the data. But I think it would be very interesting to know, Chris, in a case where what is the biggest gap when you're looking at the idea of teams having data and teams actually using data well? Like Joel gave a scenario with the understanding the difference between TVL and cumulative. But we can have data here and we can have a dashboard. But what's the difference? What's that one step that makes the difference between just having the dashboard and having the data and then actually using the data or utilizing the data well in different case scenarios from product to marketing to maybe governance? Really, yeah, there's so many use cases. Yeah.
I think the primary goal is being able to clearly define the business goals or the problems that this data and dashboard will solve. Because for most protocols, they have data, they have dashboard, but there's no specific question. Well, analysts will often go to build dashboard without trying to answer specific questions. I mean, you could have a hypothesis that newer users contribute more to revenue. So in that sense, research is driving you to validate that. So I think the foundation is having clear business problems that this data and dashboard is solve. I know because of how Dune is a big deal. Almost everybody also have the data on Dune, but then what specific business problems is it solving? And I also think this is very important for analysts. Initially, about a year ago, I would always feel, this shake when I hear AI because it feels as though AI can answer the TVL, track transaction count and all. But in working with some protocols, I realized that those who know the real use of data, the metric that we need for AI cannot just get it. You know, I've been on a project since last year, and for the last 2 weeks, we've been trying to resolve one metric both me, the team, and AI, we've been on it because defining the metrics is the main problem, not writing the queries. So I think that the heart of maximizing data for businesses is having clear business problems and goals that this data would help solve. So in that way now you can maximize what you have.
Hmm. I think one thing you mentioned here, which is like a huge, a big or blank major point, is hypothesis. Defining the hypothesis, having a clear business problem, creating an hypothesis around it, and trying to use data to make a research and answer the hypothesis. What I say, usually hypotheses are yes or no, right? And I think I definitely agree with you in the sense that when you start to drill down on um cases like, okay, what's the hypothesis? Is it yes? Is it no? You automatically get to a point where pretty much all of your data activity is just trying to answer the question if it does or it does not. Those kinds of data or those kinds of charts, one of my data mentors, one of my first data mentor would say that he doesn't like big dashboards. If he tends to believe the bigger the dashboard, the more nonsense is inside. So his idea is that the smaller the dashboard and the more concise the dashboard, it's answering really
Yeah, less is
key
more.
questions. Yeah, less is more. Yeah, because when it's just kind of understanding based on what Chris is saying that if you're trying to answer an hypothesis, it's always two answers. It's either a yes or it's a no. And then the dashboard, if the dashboard is going to answer those hypotheses, you find those dashboard very, very nimble in that kind of sense, which is quite interesting. Because recently I was working on a project at work, and I think one of the issues very similar to what Chris said is defining the metric and understanding how the metric is being calculated first before even writing the query. Ensure that the entire writing is very, very smooth. In defining the metrics, you'd always need the hypothesis, generally speaking. And then when you're writing the query, you find that the query is answering the questions that the hypothesis is pretty much trying to answer. And I've found that to be very, very interesting. Because yes, the AI is definitely with the advent of Claude, for example, Codex and the Claude code, it's incredible what's possible, right? But when you're going into decoding data, trying to index these things and trying to set up ETL pipelines, you generally find that hypothesis will help you way more, and help your data accuracy way more than just the queries, generally speaking. And I think that's something I generally agree with. Um, especially with how Chris pretty much put it, which is quite interesting, to be honest. And it does bring us to one of the other things I was looking to actually discuss. Now that we have all agreed that AI can actually do this thing, it's dawn on you that AI can actually do this thing really well, right? Now that we've all agreed that AI can actually do this thing, can actually write queries, and if you train AI with, give it a bunch of context, it's going to actually put out more queries than you can even maybe think about. Since we've agreed that AI can actually do it, for someone that's actually learning to write SQL, primarily DuneSQL, which I've been paying attention to like quite a number of times, or TrinoSQL, but I mean, pretty much the three of us on this podcast, right? We write queries on Dune. These are two SQL languages you pretty much find reoccurring in your Dune languages. What would be your advice that is going to be the best practice or the best resource for, let's say, someone who's just starting out to write queries on Dune or write SQL queries to analyze maybe the base metrics in general?
I think you're asking like the things to look out for when learning. I think
So this is what to look out for, mistakes, common mistakes.
okay.
Because AI can actually do this.
Yeah.
How do you now separate it? Like, how do you separate good query from something that is misleading, generally speaking? But I think maybe we're going to get to a point with data where people who are really experienced, your job is to actually edit AI data queries, you understand, and make it better than opposed to actually writing this thing. But if someone who is starting out, generally speaking, already has access to all these AI resources, what is the best resource point for them to be able to get to a point where they can actually put out really, really fairly usable queries and come up with interesting insights?
I think the first thing will be to try and understand the fundamentals. Before even getting to the resources now, you need to understand the fundamentals, because why you're correct that AI can actually do it. AI can also frustrate you if you don't know what you don't know what you're looking for, or if you don't know what you're doing. You and the AI will be going back and forth for hours. It can go out, it can go on for days.
Yeah. And it's
Exactly.
gonna be
So
hallucinating. You're just hallucinating.
exactly. So because the beauty of AI is you actually do need to know how to prompt it, but you can't prompt properly if you don't know your way around the fundamentals here. So my point in this instance would be to try and understand on-chain data itself, those tables, the columns, the terminologies, the formulas, because obviously there are a lot of formulas in place as well. And all of this is basically through going through the protocols documentation. Yeah, because for instance, okay, if you say, okay, I would love to calculate utilization rates, and you're giving the AI just the supply, and you're not giving it the total borrows. The AI can hallucinate and tell you, oh, this table is in Dune for borrows, include it, and then you be going back and forth, going back and forth, going back and forth. So you
And you
actually
input wrong table names.
exactly. So you need to understand the fundamentals of SQL itself, and then you need to have an in-depth knowledge of the protocol you're analyzing. Every single terminology, every single technical aspect of it, and obviously the formulas for the metrics what you want to derive. I think it was just today I was trying to calculate borrow APY, and there's a lot of technicalities to it. Supply APY apparently is borrow APY times utilization rate. All those little things, you need to understand it. If not, you'd basically wasting so much time going back and forth with. So I think the primary resource would be first trying to understand the protocols documentation, and then coming to the table within Dune to see the different tables that are there. You
That
click,
data that's available.
data that's available. You preview the tables, see there's some values you'd have to convert, times 10 raised by 18. All these little
You can
things.
even write simple queries like select star from table name limits by 10. So you get a feel of what's inside
Exactly.
initially.
So that
Get a feel
would
of
be
what's
my
inside.
advice. As against, if you rely entirely on AI, you could be lucky and you'd arrive at your destination, but it would take you a way longer time. But if you understand what you're doing, it will cut down the time.
Because I think trust is a major part of this. Yeah, sometimes when you write some queries, I'm being honest here. I mean, you should be honest. You look at data. This is wrong.
Brother man, don't put me in trouble.
Don't put me in trouble. You feel like
Don't
this
make
is
me lose
wrong.
my street credibility.
Yeah, this is not good, man. And you can tell. I mean, if you be doing it long enough, you almost know what to expect. And sometimes you're expecting 7 million, you're saying 7 billion. Something is wrong, obviously. But if you've not understood, for example, the basic calculation of how to calculate an API, how to look at the total utilization rate on the market, for example, when the number comes out, you don't go back to the protocol website to go and check. You might not be able to fact check what's happening. You understand? And you feel okay because you see it's the chart looks nice on Dune. You think it's correct, and it might be very very wrong. Really, it might be very very wrong. I think I completely agree. What about you, Chris? What's your thought on that? Best resources for someone who's starting out, who's already who already knows has access to Claude, for example, or Codex or GPT, whatever, 5.2 Pro. What's the best way to start out with data? Because if we are saying data is key, writing good data queries and coming up with good insight is really important. How do people really go about it? Say they want to learn it.
I think I would, in some, learn the hard way, and that involves two things. Think on paper. So to explain that, sometimes just use your hand and write the query first. Copy the query that AI wrote for you. Because as you're writing it down, you're really understanding the structure, and understanding how SQL is being done. I think I remember initially when I started, there were times when I would be going through Andrew Hunt's tutorial, and I would bring paper. I'll be writing all the SQL line by line. line by line, to really understand what he did and how it's worked. And realize that there's the magic in taking the pace to write. You know, like AI can write it, but you want to train your mind to understand what you're doing. The second strategy would be learn metrics by metrics.
What do you mean by that?
So active users, active users. So maybe like today, I want to learn about active users.
Yeah,
Counts distinct from server from this. So you mastered active users. You can apply it anywhere. It's a formula. Okay. Tomorrow, it could be I want to understand how TVL works. Understand TVL on Ethereum, understand TVL on like Solana, the difference for different protocols. When you begin to niche down, maybe to lending, so you can track on you can want to learn how to calculate borrow rates, supply and stuff. So as you are piecing your knowledge over time, you don't just write the queries, but you understand the pieces that build them up. So this is something that I would, advise for anyone learn the hard way, think on paper, and then take the pain to like learn metrics by metrics. Because there was a time, just because of the call, I literally went through all the Dune dashboards related to Dexys and then wrote out all available metrics that anybody can use on Dexys. So I still like learning how to write each of the queries. So with that, you can have very solid knowledge on how Dex metrics are tracked and calculated. Then you move the knowledge to the next phase. So I feel like that's how to build your knowledge, especially in this age of AI where AI can do anything, but you still need to know the basics.
interesting. While you were talking, the first point you gave was handwriting the queries. And I know definitely Joel knows this. From the days of
Moral letters.
Gary Halbert, copywriting, because me and Andrew have similar career paths, starting from copywriting. Back in the day, Gary Halbert's book, The Boron Letters, that he wrote from prison to his son, one of the fundamental thing he told his son to do was to handwrite sales letters. So he will handwrite existing sales letters to train himself or train his mind to become very, very good. Now, it's something I've personally not applied in SQL, but as you said it, like this is good. I mean, it works all the time. And then being able to actually learn metrics by metrics and that thing you mentioned, which I think is very, very good and it's very, very true. It's very, very true, especially with how progressive it can be. When if you move from, let's say, base metric like monthly active users or daily active users, and you know that, okay, for example, if you write just unique active users, you might just want to put these things to get each and every one, and then to get daily, you might now start to add a filter, right? Timestamp in that kind of sense. So I feel pretty much what you just said is kind of interesting, where we can even take what Joel has said, what you said, and kind of like create a roadmap where you start from handwriting, metrics by metrics, understanding the
Yeah.
fundamentals, and then reading the docs. Like I think that's almost a no-fail method, really. I remember when I actually wrote my first query.
You should switch it.
I remember when I wrote my first metric. I think it was on Base or Aptos. I forgot it. I went straight to the table. I think one of the words I remember, it was you get the data, boy. There's nothing like you don't really understand what you're doing. Generally speaking, yes, I genuinely feel that's quite true. I feel I feel that's something that's quite interesting. Understanding how data works. Yes, we know data works in terms of understanding these things you talked about for a newbie. For people who in Chris Ward's intermediate data analyst like us. Last episode, that's what Chris said. Intermediate data analyst. That's very, very true. Chris mentioned that, or inferring from one of the things Chris said with data analysts who pretty much understand what you're doing. In the time recently, UTAM, there's a data analyst on X, CT called UTAM. He created this document on how data dashboards can can be reusable for multiple different insights or multiple different angles for content, generally speaking, or for insights. I'm of the opinion that there are some examples, there are some data types that are pretty much useful for one thing, and one thing only. And there are some data types that can be evergreen and can be used in different scenarios and different narratives. Now, two questions in one, a double-barrel question. How important is it, or how important is dashboards needed for content creation? So, for example, I'm a data analyst. I just worked on Moonwell, for example. I put out only one dashboard. Am I underutilizing the dashboard, or is there something more that I can actually do with the content on the dashboard, depending on what's on there? And two, how much when you're creating dashboard presentation, the analysis of it, not analytics of it, the analysis of it, how much does narrative get to play in whatever you're saying at that particular time? Does narrative come first before metric, or does the metric come before narrative? Does one influence the other, or do they play kind of like a parallel role to actually explain or drive the point home in that kind of sense?
Okay. Let me start from the second question in terms of narratives and what to actually now go on to work on with regards to the dashboard. I think starting out based on the environments that we grew up in, there were times where the narrative, or more often than not, the narrative informed what we wanted to actually put on the dashboard. I remember personally, if I do how many users or how many new users were acquired in this month compared to the previous month, and I do the SQL and I see negative. You're not making your way to this dashboard.
Sometimes you write the query, you have the chat in the Dune query chat bar, but you don't take it to the dashboard. It's there. If somebody clicks the dashboard on Dune, they can still find it.
Exactly. It's been the result. It's been the query result, but you
The
want it
video
to
is
the
about it.
dashboard.
Nope.
So a lot of that happened, in our early days. Based on for anyone that knows where we come from, they understand the kind of environments we basically grew up in when it comes to on-chain data. So that was not a good look. So there was, and I remember Boxer when he made a thread. One of the comments there was like, new data analysts are very afraid to speak truth to data. They love to sugarcoat the data essentially. So, but growing up, and then growing up in the space, it has been more, and that we now receive from a positive aspect now can influence what you're actually looking to analyze. Would be maybe from a research. Maybe you wonder, okay, what happened to this protocol? Blah blah blah. Well, I think a primary example was, for instance, the Launchpad war. I think when exactly. So that would inform what you actually want to analyze. That's from a positive aspect now. And when it comes to
Reports.
exactly, you're trying to give a report. You're trying to tell a story, basically.
Yeah.
So that when it comes to underutilizing our dashboards, I think it is primarily based on what you have on there. Because just today, I think my very first Moe dashboard, after about a few weeks, I figured that most of what I had there were not really, up to par. And in a way, that's growth, right? That kind of dashboard, there could be a lot of underutilization with respect to what you have on there. So, and that's why I will always respect Sam with regards to less is more, because just you tend to now target or reach for very more insightful data to put on your dashboards. Because I remember my very first iteration of the mobile protocol dashboard had things like new users, active users, based by market, but nah, I practically went to remove it. I practically went to remove it and added things like because I was now looking to revenue, and whatnot, liquidation, and even recently today I now started to look into things like supply cap utilization, reserve history. At the end of the day, with respect to your dashboard, it depends on how much you've grown. When as you mature in the space, you'd see why a dashboard can be underutilized and why one would basically be so insightful and informative and can drive decisions within a protocol. So I think that's about it for.
I mean, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And some good laughs there, but that's very interesting. Oh, what about you, Chris?
Okay, yeah. On the conversation around metrics and narrative, I think it also depends on where you are on your journey. So oftentimes when starting out, the narrative may often lead you, but you get to a point where you lead the narrative. I mean, you don't expect someone like Hyodobi to put a chat. Once they put chat, it has a narrative. You know, we had Alex. Alex just shared a chat on Visa, and over 7 to 10 news platforms carried it. The narrative. So I think it depends on how well you're playing the game and where you're on your journey. If narrative is still informing your metrics, keep pushing, stay consistent. But then you get to a point where
I think it's
the
also
metrics you build
with
can
the Alex
inform your
stuff.
narrative.
I think with the Alex stuff, it's also down to how well you are known in your niche. Because Alex is very big on payments, um, and Polygon, for example, and pretty much everything around the
Yeah.
payment space. Yeah. So whenever
Yeah.
like his Visa, I saw that Visa chat, I was like, oh, boy, this went far, bro. So I completely agree.
And I think that ties into the next point on utilization. The niche you are can actually influence what you're doing. There are some protocols that when you're analyzing, not so much is going to be happening per day or very interesting things. So maybe you're tracking TVL. We know TVL will go up and go down, but there's no real. You know, if you dive into Alex Chat's dashboard, the one on CryptoCard doesn't have he doesn't have more than 3 chats or so. But he keeps writing articles from just three chats.
Yeah.
That's because the space where he is where growth happens every day. Like payments, volume keeps happening every day. There's change, there's change, there's change, there's change that happen. But there's some protocols that you analyze. There's so much. You know, I had a few. There's something I analyzed on super accounts. But anytime I want to maybe check weekly or week reports, not so much is happening because maybe adoption is low. But when you're in a space like maybe payments also or trading, like fully markets, you always have
Yeah.
you always have something to report on and your reports will never go down.
Especially when there's a lot of user
I think
activity.
that's yeah. So I think the niche you're in also would affect but it helps to play the long term game. Niche down and then play the long term game.
Okay. It makes sense. It does make sense. I mean, Alex is someone that I love a lot. I mean, I've studied his dashboard many times. Really, really interesting. Less is more, really. I think that's when anybody listening to the podcast who is looking to actually go into data or wants to actually invest in data, less is always more, regardless of the metric they're looking for. So that I work with some clients and they're asking for this, asking for that. And by the time the dashboard comes out, it's so much. You're scrolling like 3, 4 pages of like you really can't use the metrics there. It's not because it's just a lot, and majority of them are regurgitations of each other, right? Less is always more, and I feel that, and I feel when it comes to utilizing data, one thing I learned from the conversation with you, Utan, was that one thing can be said in multiple different ways. And Alex is a good case study, like what Chris just said. One dashboard, multiple different articles based on different activities that's happening per time. And it's kind of like when I said something earlier regarding evergreen dashboard or evergreen charts. But usually those kind of dashboard, they're just one refresh away from being useful again.
Yeah.
You kind of find because they're most of the time they are answering really critical questions, and they are solving really critical problems, or they are giving critical insights. They are either doing one of those three. So that would mean that that dashboard can come out as a video, it can come out as an article, it can come out as a post, it can come out as a tweet, it can come out as a center focus for a Twitter space or a podcast conversation. There's so much that can actually happen from a single dashboard. And I feel when analysts are creating or writing queries, some of the things that we've said on the podcast are some of the key factors that allow you to actually write queries that are very actionable. Personally, except the client categorically says it. I know they like active users. Just because I feel you can't really do much with that, right? You can't really do much with that. And for people who are writing queries or protocols who are looking to utilize data, there are many more key nuances affecting your protocol USP that you can actually use data to solve around your hypothesis, generally speaking. And I feel these kinds of things actually put you in a position where you can actually create more content. Whether or not that dashboard increase conversations or create statements become a narrative, that one I don't know. But I feel that if you really write good dashboards or build good dashboards, you can actually create multiple content angles from it. And so that's pretty much my own opinion on it, though.
I think
Um,
one last thing I'd love to add would be, there are also kind of limitations that we'll face when it comes to coming up with such good dashboards. For instance, there's been this data put out by Blockworks that shows that Aave is responsible for about 60% of the total total assets borrowed, I think, or lending volume. Yeah, lending volume. Yeah, across board. And if you try to do that kind of data or dashboard on Dune,
ah, your credit go finish.
exactly. So I think one thing that would be good to point out would be the limitations we kind of face. We just like you imagine it, but your imagination can't be a reality based on the limitations you're facing. So I think that's one thing I would love to add.
Good point. I think that's a very good point.
I mean, just simply doing Aave across all chain. Not talk of comparing Aave with all other lending protocols out there and saying that
They on EVM alone without looking at other lending protocols.
bro,
That's a lot, man.
it's a lot. Chris, are you still with us?
It's 2,500 credits now. It's usually 2,500 credits for a free account.
What do you say?
I said it's usually 2,500 credits for a free account.
Yes,
On
no,
Dune.
yeah, 2.5, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, 2.5. You need at least at 10. You need a plus account first of all. Really.
But we could even say we could argue that yes, you can do an analysis like maybe Aave across all chain. But when I want to put Aave with Juplend, with Sparkland on one chart, like the way block, bro. So that way you'll be able to easily visualize that, okay, Aave is responsible for 60% of the lending volume, except you now bring them side by side and then you kind of compare on individual charts. And then that could happen.
Even individual trade lots.
It's a lot.
I think you might not Dune. If you could do that with Dune Sim, it will maybe cheaper than using the actual Dune API, Analytics API. And I think that's interesting. We've talked a lot about where analytics goes wrong, some of the best practices, how to apply dashboard or queries and blah 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 blah. Somebody listening to the podcast at the moment would pretty much maybe a different place, or the person is starting out with data journey, or it's a protocol founder, or somebody who's just interested in data. What's the one takeaway that you feel like draws to you now, that if the person didn't learn or or the person didn't pay attention that the person should pay attention to. I mean, the biggest takeaway that you want the person to actually understand from some of the things that we discussed on the show today.
Okay, from all we've discussed so far,
Yeah, yeah. Like, what's the biggest takeaway you think it is
biggest
interesting that
takeaway.
this is
I think the biggest takeaway for me would be actually a good question. I think to be primarily trying to understand the basics, the fundamentals of number one, SQL, fundamentals of on-chain data itself. Because without those two, you can't really do anything concrete. You can't really put yourself out there because you need to understand the fundamentals of SQL to be able to leverage AI to improve your workflow. You also need to understand the fundamental of on-chain data to be able to kind of have an understanding of the metrics you want to analyze, or the metrics that will bring those kind of insightful narratives that will be actionable to the protocol or even the community at large, as something that will make you stand out amongst the crowds, because anyone can basically report cumulative sums, all-time highs, you know, total value logged, all these metrics. So you need to understand on-chain data to be able to go deeper, go knee deep, and trying to kind of source those insightful and actionable data, that protocols will value, and then it's make you stand out, so that whenever they see your reports, it's not just you regurgitating what everyone already knows or what everyone just plasters on crypto Twitter, or something that they can actually work on and make decisions off of. So that would be the biggest takeaway for me.
interesting. What about you, Chris?
Thank you. So if you want to play this game for the long term, like an athlete, you need to like train very hard. Much like Charles said, the fundamentals. Imagine a career that you want to build for the next 5 years, and then you are skipping the basics. You keep floating. Maybe one day, imposter syndrome will catch up with.
It always happens though. Yeah, I
Then,
completely agree.
and then you're like, I don't do again. So, the hard way, learn the SQL again. Write things down with your hand if you have to. Build your knowledge brick by brick. I think if there's something Joe does so well, is that for the longest while he has been in the lending space, and that has made him a master of it. So when you find like your space, then build the knowledge of the metrics, and also probably think about inventing the metrics.
Yeah, I've done that once.
That's the that's the beauty of blockchain. It's open source. Everybody can always still contribute to the ideas that are needed. So, and then lastly, please, I mean, this is to me and to every one of us, especially me and Joe. When you work hard, please show your work.
I put it out there.
Yeah.
Nobody's gonna know how good. Sometimes I'll tell Joe, I'll speak to Joe, I'll say, Joe says, I'm working on Avi on Ethereum. I'm talking like 4 days. As I said, I'm doing that one. I'm now doing Avi on Platinum. I'm like, but I'll now go back to his Twitter. But I say, boy, this guy did not post this thing. Bro, post this thing now. Show your work into, because nobody's gonna know how good you are and how much you've progressed, and you just don't know how helpful the things you're working on can be. You understand? Completely agree with Chris. Yeah, it goes for everyone. The own concern for me is majority of what I've done in the last couple of months. It's not personal, so I can't even put it out there. Anyways, share your workings. Regardless, share your workings.
Yeah, I think that's key for this year.
Yeah, for me, I think one of the things that I feel anyone's going to take away is centered around the fact that yes, you're going to work hard, and yes, you're going to observe the fundamental. But I feel that everybody kind of like thinks about data very, very differently. Everybody has their strengths. For example, I and Joe really started almost together, if not together, actually, 2023, if I'm not wrong. And this is 2023 March now, Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah. In a couple of months, it's going to be like 3 years now, or two. Yeah, and it's quite interesting in a sense that some of the things that Joel finds interesting, I'll be like, bro, this come on, keep quiet. I don't find it interesting at all because when one of the first things you really want to understand is you want to know your strengths, right? And you want to know the things that really interest you. I'm not of the opinion. I'm not of the opinion that you have to write a query across all chains to now find the one that you like. Generally, people always have, which is the way life is. People always have preferences. You have your preference. You might like Solana, for example. Then start with Solana. You like Solana, you use Jupyter a lot. You are using the protocol a lot, for example. Query that protocol first, really. And since you're using the protocol, for example, and you're really active in the space, and you are actually using the protocol, you'd find that some of the queries that you are doing is trying to answer some of the actions you are taking on chain. And best believe, like it is with product development, you solve problems you build products that solve some of the problems you're facing. It means some other people are also facing the problem. It might be also useful for other people. And if you create dashboards that give insight to some of the actions you are taking, that same dashboard can be helpful to other people within the community. And over time, you can be relevant in the community within a reasonable period of time. And then and you get really interesting community feedbacks like, well, this is not correct, this is good, this is that means first of all you are doing something that you find very interesting, because I feel data can be very boring and daunting sometimes. But when you're doing it based on or based on your certain preferences, and you're not trying to overthink it, and you're getting real time feedback from the community, some people are gonna roast you, trust me. Just best believe. Um, and you get really good, interesting feedback, you can pretty much develop like very, very fast. And then try to use the resources that are out there. Till today, this morning, I still read some of Andrew Wong's articles on analytics guide, the wizard analytics guide for Dune analytics, the basic and the advanced. I still watch Sam's YouTube videos because you really want to remind yourself of these things, because people forget. I forget as well. I think Joe forgets, Chris forgets sometimes. You might want to remind yourself of some of the basics and some of the fundamentals. And then just doing it over and over again and understanding that it is a marathon, not a sprint. It's pretty much what's going to get you to going from 0 to 1 and 0 to 1 to 10 and 10 to 50, 50 to 100. And you keep getting better every day, every single day. And that pretty much brings us to the end of today's episode on Growth Conversations. If you enjoy this session, generally speaking, with Joel, Chris, and if you want more of this, do also subscribe, do well to like, share with your friends, and if you really learned something, please do well to leave a comment. It's helpful for Joel primarily to make you happy, and for the algorithm. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for listening, and for sharing our episode. Yeah, thank you so much. Bye bye. I will say bye bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye bye.
Bye, guys.
I don't stop first.